Good afternoon, my name is Angela Moreno and this is the action research encouraging oral production through gamification in 11th and 12th grade in an EFL classroom. The key aspect of this research is that it is an action research aiming to encourage students' oral production through the application of games. This study also demonstrates that teachers can use gamification to make students motivated and to help them develop their speaking skills. Gamification was applied with 11th and 12th grade from San Miguel Arcángel School in Linares. 11th graders were 34 students. They spent a considerable amount of time talking to each other and using their mobile phones with no learning-oriented purposes. 12th graders were 28 students and they seemed to focus more on other tasks of other subjects rather than English. As a statement of the problem, it seems like speaking is not the focus of learning in most Chilean schools. The situation may make students anxious about using the language during the class or in real contexts, as students are not requested to practice speaking during the lessons. In this action research, 12th graders appear to be unmotivated by the teaching approach used, that is, grammar translation method. For 11th graders, a high degree of demotivation towards the language and the activities was evident, as they did not seem to pay attention, disrupting during the whole class. The questions that this research aims to respond are the following. How do games help to promote oral production in the 11th and 12th grade classroom of San Miguel Arcángel School? What type of games are more effective in promoting oral production? And does gamification encourage the participation of students in oral production activities? Regarding the objectives of the study, the general objective was to analyze the type of games that seem to be more effective in promoting English oral production in the 11th and 12th grade classrooms. And the specific research objectives were to identify the type of games that seem to be the most successful regarding motivation and participation of students, describe the games that seem to be the most successful regarding motivation and participation of students, and explain the advantage of using these games in the 11th and 12th grade classroom. There are three main topics that were researched in this literature review: oral production, gamification, and the Chilean context. The first point is oral production. Himes pointed out that oral production is the capacity to communicate effectively within a particular speech community that wants to accomplish its purposes. In the setting of this action research, students were not able to communicate orally in English. The focus of the lessons was mainly on reading and listening skills. This means that students did not practice contextualized language. That is why certain elements of orality and gamification were used in order to get students comfortable when using the language. The following slide shows a table based on the book by Douglas Brown, Teaching by Principles: An Interactive Approach to Language Pedagogy. There are 6 types of classroom speaking performance. 3 of them were used during the period of study, which were the imitative, intensive, and responsive types. As it is shown in the table, in the first type, students have to repeat a certain language form. In the game Chinese Whispers, students used this type of classroom speaking performance, as they had to repeat constantly one sentence. In the intensive type, students need to repeat elements of grammar or phonology. This was used in the board game, as students needed to use connectors and repeat whenever they had the same connector. In the responsive type, students reply shortly to the teacher or a classmate. This is used in the game What's in the Box, when students need to respond to the main question of the game. When researching gamification, Werbach and Hunter stated that gamification are game elements and techniques used in non-game contexts. In this case, a classroom is not a context where games are usually played, but these elements were applied to see if students felt encouraged to participate. According to Xin Yuan Huang and Soman, self-elements can be points, achievement badges, levels, or simply time restrictions. These elements get students to focus on competing with themselves and recognizing self-achievements. Social elements, on the other hand, are interactive competition or cooperation, like for example leaderboards. These elements put the students in a community with other students, and their progress and achievements are made public. In the case of this action research, self-elements and social elements were used during the process. About the Chilean context, it seems like it is complex, as teachers may face large classes and students seem to be anxious when using the language, and they may have other motivations which are not related to English. Garcia, Gillings, and Lopez mentioned that teachers should worry about the different abilities and types of intelligences that each student possesses, which is true, as all students do not learn in the same way and do not have the same motivations. According to Maddie, students often try to portray themselves as less motivated just to gain attention from their teachers so that they perceive them as helpless. This is something that may happen in Chile. Students seem to have issues at home which may make them want to form a bond with teachers. Also, based on Cornejo's study, teachers in the Chilean educational system do not have enough resources to work with students, they do not have enough furniture in each classroom, they work for extra hours without receiving any compensation, and they have low wages and probably they need to work on another job. Adding to that, teachers feel stressed and burnt out because of the long working days. This study demonstrates that teachers may have a hard time when working, and this may be one of the reasons why some teachers do not try to create interactive activities. In respect to the methods of the study, the design to gather data was mixed, as it used a checklist which was illustrated through graphs and field notes. An action research is an active study within a specific context. This is an action research as a teacher identified an issue within her teaching context, and then she applied different strategies to try to solve that situation. The scope of this research was descriptive, as it was based on previous research on the topic, and it describes every step of it. The instruments used in this action research were field notes and a checklist. Field notes are detailed notes written or recorded while observing in a research setting, or made during or after interviewing research participants. This was written by Hayham and Crocker. Field notes were used in the beginning of the process to identify the problem, and during the process when students were playing the games to incorporate more information about students' performance. Checklists provide a method for assessing presence or absence of a skill, behavior, or knowledge in a child and are typically formulated as yes or no questions. And this was written by Kochner and Chrisman. A checklist with 5 statements was used with 4 indicators of achievement. Does not meet expectations, needs improvement, meets expectations, and excellent. The 5 statements were: all students participate in the game, students show motivation to play, there is healthy competition among students, they are autonomous and keep playing when the teacher is monitoring, and they use oral English to play. This checklist was used for every game. These tools were used because the mentor teacher had manifested that these activities were time-consuming. Therefore, students did not have to complete any questionnaire or anything similar. As it can be seen in this slide, the procedures are demonstrated. Week 1, Week 2, Week 3, Week 5, and Week 10, and the application of each game in each week. And every day, field notes and checklists were completed during or after the classes. As it is seen in this slide, the action research took place on semester 7. On March and April, the checklist design and validation were done as it was needed before the study began. The game selection and application and lesson plannings were completed from April to June as the process was being carried out to see what was more suitable for the lessons. The field notes and checklists were filled from April to June as well, whenever the games were played. When analyzing the field notes, there were 3 positive aspects. which are that in both classes, students seemed to be shy about using the target language, but they overcame it. Also, games appeared to be intriguing for them, as some students manifested that they wanted to keep playing. They seemed to change their behavior as well. Throughout time, students were more participative, and they did not disrupt their classmates when playing. The negative results are that students were very competitive, which led to anger among participants. However, this can be changed if self-elements are used in the games instead of social elements. Adding to that, students were not autonomous, but this can also be learned through time. Overall, there are no negative results that cannot be changed. These are the results of the checklist on the aspect of oral production. During the lessons, perfect English was not requested, which was meant to encourage students' production. For 12th and 11th graders, they seem to focus more on competition, although 12th graders appear to care less about it than 11th graders. Also, in the case of 12th graders, the last two games seem to be more successful since there is no autonomous work. There are hypotheses that can be made about the two classes. The first one is that students did not use as much English at the beginning as they did not feel as confident and comfortable with the language. The second hypothesis involves 11th graders. When they played What's in the Box, there was a teacher of English supervising the class. Probably students did not want to take a risk as they would have been criticized by that teacher. Students probably felt very anxious about using English in front of that teacher. When referring to the perception and motivation of students, the checklist considered attitudes, participation, and autonomy. The results of the first statements were averaged out in order to illustrate them in the following two figures. There is an evident increase on motivation of students. Both groups of students were very competitive, and they may be rude between each other because of that. The attitude of 11th grade students seemed to be different in the last game. This group of students appeared to have a disruptive behavior, but this time the game was played without any interruption. There was another teacher in the class, which leaves an assumption that students need to be under authority to have a better behavior. To conclude, regarding the types of classroom speaking performance, the ones that were more useful were the intensive and responsive ones, which can be more challenging than the imitative ones. To conclude the research, the answer to each research question are presented. The first question, how do games help to promote oral production in the 11th and 12th grade classroom of San Miguel Arcangel School? The answer is that as these games requested students to speak basic English, and as they were given input to speak, they did it, although they had to overcome their fear through time. The second question was, what type of games are more effective in promoting oral production? The response to that question is that for 12th graders, What's in the Box and Last Man Standing were more effective, and for 11th grade students, Mimics, Jeopardy, and Pictionary made them speak more. The type of elements that are more effective are self-elements of gamification. The last question was, does gamification encourage the participation of students in oral production activities? It can be answered that gamification encourages students to participate more and motivates them more to speak. It can also be said that this method can be used in other areas of human knowledge as well, as gamification can be adapted to any topic. The limitations of this study are that the mentor teacher did not want games to be applied with students, which shortened the time of game application and other activities related to the research. This also made the study focused only on the researcher's perspective, as there was no application of questionnaire to know students' opinion. And as it is shown, in the following 6 slides are the references used in this action research. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation.